that video that you're talking about, a part of the reason why I've never watched it, I never have a problem watching myself. It was because I stood there and I was having thoughts as I was talking, which doesn't usually happen. Usually I'm a very prepared speaker. I know what I'm talking about. I know what I want to say. And that moment was actually my first taste of climate activism ever in my life. I was a racial justice organizer. I was a gender justice organizer. And I had the thought process that a lot of racial and gender justice organizers have, which is like, okay, I understand you guys talking about the polar bears over there. Correct. Important. But also, my people are dying, so I'm going to do that. You guys do this. You're already doing that. Cool. Have that. I'm going to deal with that. Not dying. So that was my thought process. And being at that first Sunrise protest was the first time I had ever heard climate activism talked about with any sort of intersectional lens. So there were people who I am lucky enough to call friends now, who all got up there and told stories about how their communities would be affected by climate change and by the climate crisis. And I remember standing there and being like, hold up, wait a minute. Yeah, my communities are also going to be affected by the climate crisis. And wait a minute, we're already systemically oppressed to the limit. So how exactly is this? Hold on, wait, I have to talk about this. And I got up and I just started talking. And it was in that moment that I put it together, and I've been organizing in that realm ever since, specifically because I and Dejah, who Andreas also knows, who's my friend, that was our first climate thing ever. And we were the only two people of color in the crowd. There was one other person of color from Sunrise who was emceeing, Araceli, who's incredible Latinx organizer. And we were the only two Black faces in the crowd. And the cameras who were there covering the event kept like whenever we would move, they would move, because Sunrise purports itself as this multiracial climate organization that's like specifically anti-racist and specifically multiracial and recognizes environmental justice principles, which are far more, which affect communities of color and frontline communities more often. And so when they were writing those stories, they didn't want to have to explain why there's a bunch of white kids and there are no people of color in this organization that is purporting to be about, you know, anti-racism in the environment and how the environment affects people of color differently. So they were turning with the cameras and they were turning to us every single time. We actually tried to hide and we like could not hide. It was ridiculous. So after that experience, that was part of the reason why I got up, and I was like, you're not going to sit there and talk about my communities and I'm not going to talk about my communities. Come on. And so the thing that I focus on in Sunrise is that intersection. And to be clear, there are BIPOC organizations and specifically Black-led organizations, especially in New York, who have been talking about the intersection of climate justice and racial justice for years. And for years, by environmental organizations, specifically big greens like Sierra Club, and now like 350, Greenpeace, they were shunned by these organizations. And those organizations said, well, that's not an environmental issue. That's more like a capitalism issue. The fact that you guys are dying from the same thing that's killing the planet because we're putting all of these factories in your neighborhood is not an environmental issue. That's a y'all issue. So deal with that. And so Sunrise, one of the reasons why Sunrise is so popular amongst young people is that they expressly state, and in all of the legislation that we support, it expressly states that Black communities and frontline communities that are mostly Black and brown and other people of color have been hit the worst by the same things that are killing our planet, and therefore deserve reparations in this legislation. So instead of just saying, which is one of the things about the new CLCPA that has changed from the CCPA. The legislation that we wrote and purported stated specifically that X% of the proceeds garnered from the switch to renewable energy goes to frontline communities. And then in the new version, there's like, I don't know how they muddled it, but it's something like X amount of the proceeds from the proceeds from the proceeds 5 years from now, take a left around the corner and like dip will go to frontline communities. So like things like that are discouraging. But just the fact that we still have that piece that recognizes that those communities have been affected is a win. Not the win that I wanted, you know, I don't want to go left and dip around the corner to have to get those reparations, but it's something. But the reason why I do what I do is because still in most climate spaces, I am usually the only Black person in the room. And when I'm organizing with other organizers for racial justice, or gender justice, which is where most BIPOC organizers are, I get the why. But why are you doing this? And I have to go through this whole spiel again about how our communities are affected directly, blah, blah. But yeah, so that's what I forget what the original question was.
I wanted to ask, so have you had any improvement with your relationships with like 350 or any of those? Has that improved at all, or is that still like not moving in the right direction?
Yeah, I actually did my senior thesis on this exact topic, on the history of direct racism within the environmental movement, because most people don't know that the environmental movement was not created in parallel with racism, like they intersect. In America, the people who founded the environmental movement also founded the eugenics movement. And a part of their wanting to save the environment was wanting to save the environment for specifically their race and it's very, very intertwined. Wow. And a lot of those organizations still exist today, and those are the big green organizations that get the most money, etc. Right. And so all of that stuff about the big green organizations telling communities of color that their problems were their own, that happened in the 90s. Like this was not 100 years ago. That was the 90s. And as of now, with the popularity of groups like Sunrise, I think only now has there come a shift on the ground with those organizations to recognizing that the work of Black and brown communities in terms of environment and its effects intersect, but I don't think it's enough at all. I don't think it's enough in Sunrise, to be honest. And there are more Black and brown organizers in Sunrise than I think almost any other environmental organization at least in the New York sphere right now. That's not specifically geared towards environmental justice and specific local communities. Yeah, so yes, and also no.